Okay, so on the topic of nurturing relationships, the art of building meaningful connections, there's so much, but the things that come up to me first is communication,
Mm.
right? Um, because I think that that's the bedrock of all relationships, regardless of what type of relationship you're talking about. And the clearer, the more frequent the communication, and even within the communication, I think the rules of engagement within the communication, like how do we communicate, right? Because um, I think I took it for granted that, well, you just communicate, as long as you open your mouth and you talk, you're communicating. I've learned that is not the case. Um, and a friend had given me um, some CDs a while back, and it's about how we communicate and looking for ways in which you communicate in a certain way that may be difficult for someone else. And I was actually thinking I need to go back to that because I think it's something you can always constantly go back to improve. But the rules of engagement is depend on the relationship and what the parameters are. I still think again, this comes back to being clear about what is it you need from that person. What is it you need from that relationship? Because you can't go to that person and say, hey, because you won't even recognize what you need, right? If you're not clear, how do you know that you need extra? How do you know it's not enough? But let's say you get clear in your mind and then you decide, I need something different. I need maybe a more quality conversation, or I feel like we're missing the mark when we talk. I feel like we're not getting a full understanding. And because I think in communication, it builds the relationship, right? Because as you communicate, regardless about what you communicate, it's memories, you're lacing, you learn about the person. And they'll learn about you. And so that puts another layer onto your relationship, a better understanding. So I think that once you recognize you need more, regardless of, and you internally will know what it is you feel you're missing, to be able to go to the person and say, hey, I value my relationship with you. I need a little more, and be a little clearer so they understand what it is you feel you're missing from that communication. So then they can determine, do I have that? Do I possess that? Can I aid in that? And I feel
Yeah,
like how you broach that is so important.
yeah. I would say though, I don't know if this was the case for you, but for me, I honestly did not realize how important building and maintaining relationships were until I was probably working on my MBA. So I
Mm.
was close to 30 at that time. I really need to go back and do the math sometime. So I'd tell you exactly how old I was when I was doing it. Because I grew up on a farm and I grew up in the church. And so there were no relationships outside of basically the family and the church, right? There was no external relationships. And so it never dawned on me how important building and maintaining relationships was. And then I maintained friendships with 3 women who I did my MBA with. And then you and I connected um, after my PhD and when we did coaching, and we maintained that relationship. And I think I've grown to be better at building and maintaining and nurturing relationships
Mhm.
because I realized how important it was. It used to tick me off because I know this is going to sound funny, but I I would get mad because I'd be like, people should give me opportunities because I'm pretty smart and I'm good at what I do.
Mm.
And I would get like, it would really annoy me that I wouldn't get considered. But the reality is people can't consider you if they don't know you. And it
Mm.
took me a long time to realize that you have to get
Mm.
out there and you have to be talking to people so that people can even think about you if there's opportunities. And because I've been more mindful about that, I've gotten a lot more opportunities.
Mm. Interesting. So the idea is that it's not it's not such that, well, I'm waiting for this to be given to me, but what role do I play in the fact that it's not here?
Yeah. Yeah,
And the other
I think
part
that
is,
that's important to look at.
yeah, oh, I think so. And again, I think that it comes back. So I think a lot of these jump off points come from us being able to recognize what it is we need, some new awakening, right? We
Yeah.
were like, hey, I'm trying to go in this direction. What new is needed? And I think oftentimes that's when we start realizing, wait a minute, maybe the skill set I have now is not enough, right? It
Yeah.
calls for something extra, right? It costs us something extra. And I think that sometimes that's an organic um evolution, right? It's not like you were gonna like, oh, I need to improve my community. It doesn't work that a situation presents itself, or you lend yourself to an opportunity and you're like, oh, I maybe I'm not thinking about this the right way. And so I think oftentimes it happens that way. The other thing about nurturing, and you brought this up, nurturing relationship is time investment, right?
Yeah.
Um, Giving of yourself. Like you can't just say, okay, well, when I'm ready, you should just be pouring out and investing in me, but I don't invest in you. I'm too busy to invest in you, but hey, I want it coming one way. So the thing is, there's a two-way street.
Yeah. For sure, for sure. For any relationship, whether
Mhm.
it's professional or romantic or friendships or coaching or whatever it is, there is an investment in that. That's that's very insightful.
The other thing is, and we've touched on this different ways, supporting someone without conditions, right?
Mm,
So when someone is speaking, even if they're saying something you're not comfortable with, especially in the event they're speaking about you, right? Like maybe they need something extra from you, and we've been conditioned how we've been conditioned. And maybe nobody's ever brought that to your attention, or it's been brought, but it's a triggering point for you, right? Being able to give space and be open to really what they're saying, as opposed to being in a defensive posture, right? So, because I can think of times when people have said things to me, and honestly, I really wasn't open, right? I liked to think I was
yeah,
open until I got triggered. If I'm triggered, I'm not open. So that's what tells me, if it starts to feel uncomfortable, I'm not being open. Because what I'm doing now is marshaling a response,
right.
right? So the minute you finish, I'm coming back. And I try to pay attention to that. Like when someone is saying, hey Rose, whatever, I try to say, okay, as I'm listening to them and giving them space, I'm also thinking, how am I feeling right now? If I'm feeling sort of neutral and I'm receptive, then that means I'm in a good space. If I start feeling uncomfortable or start feeling sort of defensive, and we use the word trigger, then there's something, and that tells me there's something that I need to probe. So instead of saying, "Oh, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong," the question then becomes, why are they triggering me? What's behind this? Why did, when they said this, it didn't bother me? And of course, you and I know, a lot of times triggers mean that they're hitting against some pillar, some belief system, or some in conditioned way you are, that they're
Yeah,
hitting up against it, and you don't like that. And so the first natural thing is defenses. I'm ready to tell you you're wrong. I'm ready to tell you that, and then sort of like, how dare you question this space? But the thing is that space, what's wrong with looking at it, right? I look at it more so as it's not a matter of right or wrong, but maybe I need to look at it. Let's put in the light. You're bringing this up. Let's see what we have. Because even if at the end of the day we agree to disagree, it informs me about what triggers me. So it's never um a conversation that's fruitless, if you understand. So
yeah.
as
It's
I'm
it's
sort
a
of journeying
growth
into myself, yeah,
opportunity.
yeah. Like, why is this? Why they're hitting up, and what is it they're hitting up against, and why?
So this is the thing that I heard as I was listening to you is cultivating curiosity. So
Yes.
if it starts to trigger you and you're like, right, and you're like, oh, because you feel yourself getting defensive and all that kind of stuff, then you can just practice going into curiosity,
Yes.
asking yourself those kind of questions,
Yes.
which allows you, I think, two things, right? Ask the questions, but then answer yourself honestly and not
Yes.
from, because I know for myself,
Mhm.
it's super easy for me to ask the questions, to be very curious, and then to be very lopsided in how I respond to myself.
Right. And I think we all are, we all are that way, right? And I think it's just yes, you have to sort of adopt the appreciation of, let me be curious, right? Because maybe what they're saying isn't legitimate, but before I just move to protect it, let me see. Maybe I still will protect it, but let me see. Let me see why this is triggering me. And I just think that those are ways in which we find where our boundaries are. Maybe you're hitting against a boundary of mine.
Yeah.
There's something there. Investigate. And you struck on something, the idea of honesty and transparency, right? Like that, we use that word transparency, like, oh, I want transparency. But when those things happen, maybe you don't always want it, but you should always seek it.
Yeah. And there was something, I gotta think about it for a second, but there was something that you said that I was like, oh yeah. And now
It's okay. Yeah. But I
sorry.
mean, what is so interesting about this conversation is that at the base of it, our quality of life is contingent on the quality of our relationships, right?
Yes. So that's
Um,
exactly what I was just going. That was that thing that went
oh,
is who you let speak into your life,
yes.
right? So I try, this is a practice. I'm not super good at it all the time, but I try to be open to a lot of different voices.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Mm-hmm.
there's different ways of looking at the world, there's different ways of being in the world. And I want to create space for all of those different ways of being to be.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I know that there's certain voices that I don't, I will give the person space,
Mm-hmm.
but not the idea that they're presenting. Because that idea, like you said, with our pillars,
Mm-hmm.
that idea clashes with one of my core values.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't happen often, but there are times when it does. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think right now. Usually it will be something around a person not being very growth mindset. Like
Yes. Yes. And I struggle with that. So that is a shared struggle I have. Um, and I think you hit on something that I think it's important to make the distinction between giving the person space to speak because you're honoring their voice, but it doesn't mean that you have to, it doesn't mean it actually should result in you changing a core belief, especially if you know why you hold that belief. And that's a
I
belief
think
you
that's
want,
the difference, right? It's the no, you know why.
you know why.
I know why, and it works for me in my life.
Right. So let me ask you a question. If let's assume you and I having a conversation, and I come to you and I'm not sure, just whatever reason, and I hit up against a core pillar of yours. If you know about that pillar, you're aware of it, you know why you hold it. Do you think you would become defensive or be triggered by when I hit up against it?
That's a good question. I I think it's more complicated with a conversation between you and I, because we have a coaching, trusting friendship that's
Okay.
been
So
4
use someone
years.
else. So use someone else.
Um, so a couple years ago, hasn't been recent. Dan and I were mattress shopping.
Mm-hmm.
And now you'll be able to judge me, Rose. So Dan and I were mattress shopping, and the salesperson was bragging that he stopped doing any kind of training years ago because he's getting ready to retire.
Mm.
And I immediately, and I knew, like, I just knew, like, and so I had to like hold myself there. Oops, sorry. I really wanted to give him a lecture.
Mm.
And I didn't. I just listened to him, but I did judge him.
Mm.
Very much so, about because growth is such a core pillar of mine.
Mm.
And so and so this is where this the more you learn, the more you have to grow.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was like, that person is on their own journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to honor the fact that they're on that journey. But I really wanted to give him a lecture.
Mm. Interesting, because I posed that question to you because I was somewhat posing it to myself. I find that if I'm aware of the pillar, if I'm aware of it and I know why it matters to me, and I intend to hold it firm in my life, when someone butts up against that, I tend not to be defensive, but I'm prepared to explain. As opposed to if they rub up against a pillar that I'm not aware that I have. Right? Because if I'm not aware, I'm just triggered now. Like I'm like triggered, but I don't know why. And I feel the need to raise up the defenses,
Right.
batten down the hatches. But if I'm aware and I can smile and say, okay, they're butting up against this. So then when they're finished, I can say, well, and I can share with them and say, this is what I value and this is why I value it. So if I say or act in a way that bothers you, I need you to understand that this matters.
Right.
Whereas if I'm not aware, I'm triggered and I can't sort of stay open because now I'm triggered, right? And so, there's once you become triggered, your ability to be open and create space becomes very challenging. I mean, I can't, because you then sink in, right? And so
I even
feel
hate
like,
to say this. I even hate to say this, right? Because I know as soon as I do, I'm going to have an experience that does this to me. But I haven't had that in a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just makes me curious as to why that hasn't happened.
Why what hasn't happened?
Of somebody bumping up against a pillar
Mm-hmm.
that triggers me. And
Okay.
and so that's super curious for me.
Well, it could
Have
also
you had it happen recently? Okay.
yes. I'm in a situation where that, because as you know, one of the core things, and this came out in coaching, was the idea of my independence, how much I hold it firmly. And I have reasons and memories from childhood why I hold it. And I know when I'm being triggered, when I feel as if someone is either trying to control me. I'm controlled to what I say, how I say it, what I do, just in little ways, nuanced ways, not in the big obvious ways. And because that's a pillar for me, that's like, it takes very little for the bell to ring, right? But because I'm aware of it now, as I wasn't before, Because in the past, when I can now look back, when people hit up against it, I would just say, you know what? I don't deal with people who try to control. I need to remove you out of my life. I may still do that, but the thing is, the difference is I can say, my independence matters to me, and you're butting
Right.
up against my independence, and I don't like that. And let me tell you ways in which you are doing that that's causing an issue for me, of concern to me, and I'm bringing it to your attention because I need you to know that that's a pillar of mine. And then that lets you know, hey, is this something I can deal with or not, right? Because now I've explained, I've put the information out there, let's see what you do with it. Whereas before I would have said, you know what? Yeah, Sarah's toxic, gotta cut her. Gotta cut her, no explanation, just,
Right.
and a lot of times I don't say it. I just then remove myself, which
Right.
I think, looking back, I did that person a disservice because I didn't know it. I didn't
Right.
consciously know it. But I did them a disservice because I got triggered and I just knew I had to run the opposite direction without first explaining to them what matters to me, that thing matters to me, and that their actions or words um, demonstrated a issue where you're heading up against it, and I won't abide by that kind of thing. But at least let them know what's happening as opposed to just disappearing, right? And so the reason I asked the question about if you know that it's a trigger, if you know that it's a pillar, does it change how you react? For me, it does, because now I can tell you why. And I
Yeah.
instantly know, and I'm like, "Ooh, you're rubbing up." Okay, and I know, so I don't get triggered. I'm just aware that you're tapping against that pillar, as opposed to having no clue, but I just get defensive. And so I think one of the things about coaching for me has been, I'm starting to learn all of the things that matter to me.
Yes.
And so that when those things happen, I can communicate better with that person.
Yeah. I love that. And I would agree. Like if it's a recognizable pillar that I've worked with, and I told you the other day that I discovered one that I hadn't realized was
Right.
which was value,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so it's easier to explain it once you understand it yourself. But we've been coaching for 4 years, and value hadn't been something that had consciously came up for me before.
Mhm.
So I feel like, I think the explanation you used the other day about when you're peeling the onion, and instead of the onion getting smaller, it's actually growing, and every peel you get off of there makes it even bigger. I
Right.
think that's what is happening for us.
Right.
And so I've noticed a theme, and I'll share it with you and see what you think. So
Mhm.
the theme that I keep noticing here is self-awareness.
Yes. 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 Because when I use the word, you need to be clear about what it is you want. Awareness is the precursor, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, because self-awareness seems to be such an important piece, what are some things that people can
Mhm.
do to
Mhm.
help them get more self-awareness?
So, although I think that for me, and I think for you also, as we've made an intentional goal to learn more about ourselves. So we're like on an
Yes.
intentional journey. But even if you're not, and even if you're not aware of certain things, my thing is, if there's something nagging at you, be curious. So even if you don't, that's a starting point, right? Like if somebody's saying something to you and that just gets you riled up, even if you don't mention it to them, ask yourself privately, why is that bothering me? And I think that's the starting point. Like, why is it getting to me? Because even with us coaching over time, we still have to ask ourselves that foundational question, like, why is this bothering me? Where's this
Yeah.
coming from? Why am I starting to feel agitated, defensive? Why am I ready to, throw up, throw up blockades? And I think that everyone can start there, right? When you
Yeah.
just feel like something is annoying you and it makes you very upset, ask why. And I think that that's the beginning.
I think that's a great place for people to start. I think the other piece of it is that you need to spend time with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are busy all the time doing whatever it is you're doing, you miss the opportunity to get really curious about yourself and to explore that.
And so you bring up something that I think is important, which is in order to, the first relationship you must nurture is yourself, is your relationship with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that
I love
impacts
that.
everything else. It impacts, it's so, and you know, and I've said to you, I've come to understand that the most important relationship must be with myself first. So I need to nurture that. And as I nurture that,
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome.
and I create space and compassion from myself, I likewise can extend it to other people.
Right. Right. You can't give other
So
people
I
what you
think
don't
that
give
that's the
yourself.
part, like, just be curious about what yourself. And second, when you're in those conversations or things upset you, ask why are they upsetting you? And don't stop until you figure it out.
Awesome. Great conversation, Rose.
Thanks, Sarah.